Tides, rising ambition, advancing NDC 3.0 in the Marshall Islands. My name is Mariana Panuncio Feldman. I am the Director of Country Engagement of the NDC Partnership, and it's a pleasure to welcome us to our home here in Belém. Today is a special moment. The Republic of the Marshall Islands is officially launching its NDC 3.0, a demonstration of climate leadership that continues to set the pace not only for small island states, but for the world. This session showcases how the Republic of the Marshall Islands is translating ambition into action, supported through strong collaboration with many partners. For the NDC 3.0 in particular, the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre and the NDC Partnership, including targeted support through the Partnership Action Fund, which has helped accelerate planning, coordination, and investment readiness. The NDC Partnership is proud to support RMI's journey to connect political ambition with actionable, tailored support from its global membership. We will hear today from government leaders, development partners, and multilateral institutions who are working hand in hand and side by side the RMI to make its NDC 3.0 implementation a reality. So to begin our conversation today, I am pleased to invite Anne Olhoff, Director at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre, to provide opening remarks and set the global context. Anne, please.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Can you hear me? Okay. So, dear friends and colleagues, it's a pleasure to join you here today alongside the government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the NDC Partnership. Few nations embody both the urgency and the leadership required in this moment more vividly than the Marshall Islands. Rising seas, saltwater intrusion, and increasing climate impacts are not only distant risks, they're daily reality. And yet the Marshall Islands has consistently stood at the forefront of global climate ambition, from the first 1.5 aligned long-term strategy to its leadership on its NDC 3.0. UNEP's latest emissions gap report reminds us why leadership is so essential. Current policies still place the world on a trajectory towards up to 2.1 degree of global warming over this century. And the adaptation gap report shows that developing countries require 12 to 14 times more adaptation finance than what is currently flowing from developed to developing countries. For SIDS, adaptation needs average 3.6% of GDP, among the highest of any group, and the risks escalate dramatically if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees of global warming. In short, global ambition and global action is falling short, and the stakes for SIDS are existential. No amount of adaptation funding can protect vulnerable nations if global mitigation fails. And that's exactly why the NDC 3.0 is crucial. It must close the gaps both in ambition and in implementation and provide a credible pathway to real-world resilience and decarbonization. Allow me to highlight 5 essential elements of NDC 3.0, particularly for SIDS. First, integrate mitigation and adaptation using risk assessment, climate science, and long-term resilience planning. Secondly, provide investment-grade policies with clear sectoral targets, enabling frameworks and stable signals capable of mobilizing public and private finance. Thirdly, mainstream resilience across all sectors: water, infrastructure, food systems, health, biodiversity, something SIDS are already leading on globally. Fourthly, include robust costing of adaptation and mitigation actions, closing the major gap in current NDCs. And fifth, and finally, be backed by credible implementation frameworks that ensure plans translate into measurable outcomes. The Marshall Islands approach reflects exactly this direction, a whole of government vision aligned with its development policy, stronger institutional capacity, and an agenda that links climate action with investment planning. This is the kind of leadership the world needs: practical, ambitious, and rooted in lived experience. At the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre, we are honored to support the Republic of the Marshall Islands in advancing its NDC 3.0 under the PATH initiative. Through our expertise in data analysis, energy systems modeling, climate finance, and investment pipeline development, we hope and work to help ensure that the Marshall Islands enhanced NDC is not only visionary, but fully implementable and finance ready. To this end, we look forward to working closely together with key development partners for the RMI, including the Asian Development Bank and UNDP, who are both present here today. Thank you so much, and I look very much forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for grounding our discussion in the latest lessons for how to make NDCs strategic instruments that guide ambitious action and, of course, the urgency of our task, not just in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, but around the world as we turn to implementation. The way I'm going to proceed is I'm going to invite speakers one by one to come to the podium and give their intervention, and then I'll invite you when you're done to join us here at the chair, so that if time allows, we have some time for Q&A with the audience. Okay, so with that in mind, it is now my honor to invite Tina Sege, Climate Envoy for the Republic of the Marshall Islands. For Tina, the Marshall Islands you have long been a moral compass for global climate ambition. We are not just for the Marshall Islands, but on behalf of the NDC Partnership, we're grateful to hear your reflections on the journey towards NDC 3.0, the national priorities that drive this work, and how community engagement and the 2050 vision that the RMI has have shaped this pathway. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to NDC Partnership for hosting this event. I think the journey for our NDC 3.0 started last year. We worked for much of that year pushing to get this done. You know, it's a very complex process, I'm sure all of you know. But really, for us, for myself personally, the turning point was actually at COP29, when we were able to give our president an update of the work that we had done so far, and she said we hadn't done enough, and we would get it done in February of 2025, and that really pushed us. We probably went faster than I've ever seen my government work. Between December, we had done work up to that point, but we really locked in, as they say, with the young ones these days. So that in February 2025, we had our NDC 3.0, and it was the first Pacific country to submit an NDC. And one of only 13 that were submitted was the deadline. That had been the deadline that had been set. And it really shows, I think, two things. One, how important it is to have the support of your leaders to make sure that the work is done. But also, it underscores our long-standing commitment on ambition and action. So in that NDC, we committed to achieving an absolute reduction in GHG emissions of at least 58% below 2010 levels by 2035, covering all major gases and sectors. towards a goal of achieving net zero by 2050. And for us, as we put together that NDC 3.0, it was important to start with the level of ambition needed to keep 1.5 in reach, and as well to follow through on what had been decided in Dubai as part of the global stocktake, and to reflect that decision in our NDC. I think and then search for the solutions to get us there. Because we know that by putting the policy instruments in place, it helps to bring solutions to our shores. I'm going to take this down because I think it's falling anyways. We also wanted to reflect a broader set of ambitions than had been in our first NDCs. Our first NDCs were very focused on mitigation targets, and I think that just reflects where we were at that time. But we are now, we were coming to 10 years from Paris, and we had much more experience of what certainly the impacts of climate change were, and decided that this needed to be reflected in the NDC. We had completed our national adaptation plan 2 years before. We wanted to make sure that a lot of that work was captured in the NDC. And we also wanted to put it in the context of a broader sustainable development framework, recognizing that climate is development and development is climate, So I think in addition to that, the last piece that we really needed to reflect was the impacts of loss and damage. So this NDC, just on paper, is a much longer document. I think our first ones were maybe about 5 pages, then this NDC is more about 30-some. And it's because we have grown. We know more, and we have more to share in terms of our experience and our ambitions as a country. So the way that it was developed is through an instrument that we put together some years ago called the Tele-Teleo Committee. This instrument actually was something that at an institutional level was worked on even back when NDC Partnership first came in to support Marshall Islands. And it is the instrument that gathers all our ministries across government that have a stake in climate action and ambition around a table led by the Minister of Environment and our Chief Secretary, which is the top civil servant in our system. And this is our way of bringing together across government all the voices that would need to input to NDC 3.0. That working group, or that committee, has 3 working groups: one on mitigation, one on adaptation, and then a cross-cutting working group that we actually call our NDC. That's linked to the NDC Partnership and the support we've had from NDC Partnership to, in fact, mainstream climate work across government and non-government as well. So that 3rd working group is been chaired by the NDC Focal Point, who is supported by NDC Partnership for some time. And it was through the TTEC committee that we not only gathered the information through various stakeholder consultations, but in the end validated the final text before it then went to our cabinet and our president for approval. And I think I will never, that whole process will be always in my mind from the moment the president said you will have this done by February 15, 2025 to the minute that we pressed the send. And we couldn't get it to send. This is a very common experience, maybe for those of you from the islands. The internet wasn't working, and the document was too large. And we were having trouble. My director of climate change, he's here. I was on a plane texting him as I was getting off of internet, please, can you send an email saying we're trying to send by the deadline. The Secretariat needs to show that they received it by the deadline. And when I landed in Hawaii, did you send the email? And he said, yes, the email was sent. In the meantime, we're also texting with the Secretariat to make sure that they had received it, because it was very, very important to us, because we had that mandate from our president that this had to be in on the deadline. It could not be late. And so with all of those very well-known issues that we have in islands with technology, access, we made it happen. I think now, I mean, really the issue now is implementation. We will work with partners, including NDC Partnership, to now implement the NDC. We know that as much as we do, it's not up to us. It's really the major emitters, those in the G20, who have to not just submit, but implement 1.5 aligned NDCs. And that's another reason we come to the COP, is to continue to push for that ambition and action by those who have the most impact. But from our side, as a small country, we also know that we can set an example of what you can do when you don't accept the barriers and you decide that you're gonna meet the moment regardless of the barriers, which is what we did with this NDC. So I'm very proud. There's many people here who worked on it and who continue to work on implementation. And I just want to say thank you to all the partners who have supported us in the effort. Como tara.
So thank you very much for that journey, for sharing that journey. We all know the pressure of a deadline, but what a deadline that was. And just reflecting that it wasn't just submitting the document, right? This was a reflection of the commitment backed by strong political leadership, by the will of the people of the Marshall Islands, by a vision to drive climate action forward. So thank you very much, Tina, for sharing that. Let me now turn to invite to the podium Jenny Bonwell, Head of Climate Strategies and Policy from UNDP. Jenny, it's important to say that UNDP plays a very important role in strengthening governance and institutional foundations, areas that are critical for SIDS, managing limited capacity but ambitious climate goals. And I would also say from our own experience with UNDP being such an active member in the NDC Partnership, the support that UNDP is providing around the world. So Jenny, we would love for you to share with us how UNDP is supporting institutional strengthening, sustaining national ownership, and coordinating effectively with country systems so that support aligns with the Marshall Islands priorities. Please.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariana. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's really great to be here. First, just a thank you to the NDC Partnership, to the Government of the Marshall Islands for inviting us, for hosting this today. I think it's an important conversation to be having, and it's hard to follow Tino's remarks, but I think the many of the points that I wanted to make are exemplified in the story from the Republic of Marshall Islands. And first, just to start off by saying the leadership that we're seeing from the SIDS, particularly around NDCs, is quite strong. And we saw this, of course, in the last generation of NDCs, where we saw ambition numbers from SIDS outpace the other groups globally. We saw SIDS with 85% greater ambition on mitigation, 90% on adaptation, and so really, as you say, a symbol and a message on the leadership and the importance of this work. As we see these NDCs come through for the third generation, we're similarly seeing the leadership from SIDS on ambition. As we heard from the Marshall Islands across other SIDS, we now have 21 SIDS that have submitted their NDCs. And we see nearly 90% of them expanding the scope on mitigation ambition and 94% on adaptation. So really seeing that step in terms of progress on ambition. But I think what we want to focus on here and the discussions is really around the implementation question, right? I mean, the symbol and the statement of an ambitious NDC is only as strong as the ability and the next steps to take it forward. And this is something, as we have been supporting countries on the NDCs and as we kind of launched our support on the preparation of NDCs last year with the Climate Promise, there was a very strong message and signal from many developing countries, but particularly from AOSIS, from SIDS, that let's not forget about implementation. As we step into preparing NDCs, of course this is important. It's a political process as well, but we need to maintain that implementation piece. And so one of the things that we've seen, and we've been working closely with countries on this in particular, is how a lot of these implementation elements have been embedded within the NDC preparation process. So the NDC was not just about doing the assessments from a sectoral perspective, looking at what those targets are, but it was actually about embedding those targets through the process into development sectoral planning. It was about establishing a lot of those institutional coordination mechanisms and the platforms that can serve both for preparation and then also for implementation. We've also seen in many NDCs, and particularly across these 21 SIDS so far, a very strong indication and focus on financing in the NDCs. So 82% of SIDS NDCs include reference to the specific finance needs for implementation, and 70% have a detailed costing in their NDC. So throughout the preparation process, with an eye towards implementation, all of that groundwork has now been done so that implementation is much easier and more streamlined as a next step. You also see the connection between a lot of the targets and other aspects of society. 82% of SIDS have included just transition in their NDC, with a specific chapter in about half of those that look at just transition. So how are these targets actually impacting and affecting different parts of society is a critical element that's already been thought through for the preparation process and can now be delivered through implementation. In terms of the work that UNDP has been doing, we've supported about 21 of the SIDS NDCs to date, and this has been a strong focus in terms of how to ensure that the preparation is helping to advance implementation. We've done support around implementation stock taking, so taking stock of how the last NDC is advancing in order to identify what some of those needs and barriers are for taking it forward in the next round. The costing work, the mainstreaming work, building that national capacity as was mentioned, and the stakeholder engagement as well has been a critical part of a lot of that support. What we see as part of the process so far in terms of building those foundational elements for implementation is important as we take this forward. And one of the questions, Mariana, you asked in terms of sustaining that capacity, it's really about establishing an NDC architecture in countries that sustains the cycles of NDC. We've now learned enough, I think, as engaging in the third cycle of NDC is what's needed. How can we build on a lot of the lessons we've learned and the needs that we see in order to create this kind of sustained foundation for NDCs as we move forward. And then to say, as we're talking about implementation, we can't forget about access finance, mobilizing finance, and a lot of the work that we're also trying to do in support of SIDS is to link this policy process with the broader portfolio that we support, as well as with other partners, We have our Rising Up for SIDS strategy with UNDP, which is helping to deliver the Abbas agenda and really connecting the dots between a lot of those targets and the different programs that we're supporting, whether it's access to vertical funds, whether it's working with bilateral partners, really bringing the finance where it's needed in terms of delivering on a lot of those targets. The other piece of it that was mentioned, just to raise as well, is the issue around loss and damage. And this is something else that we've seen quite strong in this new generation of NDCs, where over 90% of all NDCs include loss and damage, but particularly in SIDS, this has been a very, very strong focus. 75% of SIDS NDCs have a dedicated loss and damage component or chapter in their NDCs. So really recognizing the critical component or the needs around loss and damage emerging, or I shouldn't say emerging, they're always there, but being more explicit in terms of how then we can take those forward as we look at the new fund as it's operationalized, and how we can really embed that within the next steps on implementation. And then finally, just to say, in terms of the approach, very much you talked about institutional strengthening, very much rooted in empowering and leadership at the country level, really working with the regional institutions and the national institutions to make sure that this is embedded within the existing systems, but also strengthening those capacities as needed as we build in what we've learned across the NDC process. So I will stop there, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's use this opportunity that we have this powerful women-led panel to open it up to the audience to see if you have any questions. Does anybody would like to ask any questions of Anne, Tina, or Jenny? Okay, while you are thinking what you would like to ask, I'm gonna ask some follow-up questions. And hopefully the audience would join me in asking some questions as well. So, Tina, you definitely mentioned that despite going at full speed, there has also been a process of strengthening the process of NDC development in this journey from the last 10 years. Which improvements in this round of the development of this NDC 3.0 do you think better position the Marshall Islands to implement relative to the NDC prior? What are your reflections on that?
Thanks for the question. I think the stakeholder consultation, essentially the T-Tech committee process, which we didn't have before. And we still need to strengthen that. It's an ongoing process. But we have it as an institutional mechanism for, I don't want to say streamline, but gathering the right voices around the table, and then not just to create it, but then to go back and say, okay, well, so this is what we all agreed, and now, you know, you're responsible for this piece or that piece. They already know because they were the inputs. So I think that mechanism, which we're still working on continuously strengthening, is what is different about the 3.0 as opposed to the initial NDCs.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe, Anne, having accompanied the process in the RMI, but also in other places, I mean, we just heard from Jenny some very interesting insights and trends. What have you observed in the Marshall Islands and also in other countries in terms of trends towards this broader institutionalization of NDCs? How do you think that better positions countries for implementation?
I think overall we've seen quite an impressive development.
Are you hearing? Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yes? Okay, good, good.
So I'm heavily involved in the emissions gap report. I'm also involved in the adaptation gap report, and then of course in all our country support. And when you look at it from the global side, from these global gap reports, it's always not great news, right? I'm sort of the speaker of bad news. But when we look at it at the country's level and when we work together with partners in developing countries, I think we see a lot of progress. So it might not, and really in most of these countries, in SIDS, I think it's really remarkable to see how SIDS take the lead on 1.5 alignment, including on mitigation. You know, countries that have absolutely no responsibility for the situation we're in, but also seeing it as an opportunity and also as a global obligation. So I think a lot has been happening, especially with the partners that we work with over the past 10 years. We started out for the first NDCs, the intended nationally determined contributions, back in 2014-15, providing support to 36 LDCs, including SIDS, in developing those. And at that point, everybody was sort of grappling with what should be in an NDC, both adaptation-wise and mitigation-wise. Now there's so much more capacity. It's remarkable to see how it's not only in the environment ministries, but really integrated across line ministries. You have much more detailed discussions. And then I also think that on the whole transparency side, the BTRs, I think have meant a lot for the quality and the depth of the new NDCs. So I do see an enormous development.
Thank you. Jenny, is there anything else you would like to add? No, no. Let's switch. You,
Is that better?
yes,
Okay.
thank you.
I think reflecting a bit on what Tina said, what's really interesting to see is the link between the political commitment and the local action. And I think SIDS are again, leader in this, in being able to have that kind of political push at the highest level, but then be able to channel that down. And you mentioned not even just at national level, but having the local stakeholder engagements, bringing civil society in, very inclusive NDCs we see across the board. So I think that's also something that has evolved over time, where at the beginning this was a bit of a part of a political process. And now that's actually starting to translate into real concrete action on the ground through a lot of the different mechanisms we've discussed today. But making that connection, I think, is so critical.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Okay, I'll ask another one. So, how can, as we look ahead now, I mean, I know that countries, including the Marshall Islands, have been implementing all along, right? But as we now putting the NDC 3.0 behind and looking into the NDC 3.0 implementation, how can the NDC partnership and the partners that make part of this coalition align with the national priorities of the Marshall Islands and support implementation? What do you see as the critical needs around which we can crowdsource? Tina, your thoughts.
I think we look to having, I'll say something very practical, which is that early next year we're having a donor roundtable in the Marshall Islands, and you know, our ambitions that are in our NDC, but also reflected in our national adaptation plan. These are what we're putting forward, and to have partners understand that these policy instruments are consulted. As you've talked, you've mentioned, many of them are costed, and to meet us around those instruments and have discussions related to those instruments and those long-term plans that we're putting forward, and get away from this project model that, especially in a SIDS, where we have these capacity constraints. And I think I've said this many times, we'll drown in the reports before the sea rises. I mean, it's just impossible. And so, you know, this is why we put so much time and effort into these planning and policy documents. And then we're looking to create tools that work for us. So in the Marshalls that's putting setting up a resilience and adaptation fund. And for us, adaptation and mitigation, they're two sides of one coin. So many of what we need to do on mitigation directly relates to adaptation. So when we bring energy to households that don't have it through solar, or we transform and transition away diesel to renewables, that's security for us. That's resilience. And so this fund that we're setting up is really to support all of those efforts. It's called an adaptation resilience, but for us, again, mitigation is security, it's resilience. And to work with us and the tool that we're trying to set up to address some of the issues that we have that I think plague so many small island developing states with access, with long-term predictable finance. So really to meet us where we are, as opposed to showing up with where they would want them to be or us to be, right? And understand that we know what we need. We understand that we need to back those needs up with very strong plans and very strong outputs. But having us yet again justify what we need in order to, that model doesn't work, and we need to really switch to a new model. Otherwise, we won't be able to implement.
Thank you. The NDC Partnership is right now very proud to be working with 108 countries, including the Marshall Islands, and we are proud to say that we are country-led, country-driven, and where we say we meet countries where they're at, and we look to leave no one behind. So for us, we are guided by the priorities of the Marshall Islands, what you need and what other members of the partnership need, so that then we can rally partners around you to support your implementation, your priorities. So with that perspective in mind, we know we're facing a challenging time from a funding perspective, but just as you're looking ahead, UNEP Copenhagen Climate Centre, UNDP, you're looking to implementation, what do you see as the main priorities that your institutions are considering and thinking about to support countries like the Marshall Islands implement their NDCs? And
so I would like to start by saying that I really like that you don't separate between adaptation or mitigation, or that you see that they're so closely related, but also what you said, that this is not about climate. Climate is development, and development is climate. And I think we see that much more, and a much stronger understanding of that now than ever. And I think it's also hopefully what it will help us in this difficult situation right now, with funding going down and priorities slipping away from climate to other things. Really, we all need to see it not as something separate, but as something that's totally integrated into economic, social, environmental development in the countries. And that's also, and fortunately, we're also in a very different situation now than we were just 10 years ago, in terms of many of the mitigation opportunities and solutions actually being more cheaper than fossil fuel-based ones. So it also means that there is we have the market mechanism working in at least in part of on the mitigation side. So it does make it easier to finance and to invest if we can get rid of some of the remaining barriers, of course. And that's where I see a key role for us to help lower the cost of capital, to help find good business models, to help access both finance but also drive investments as well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe building a bit on this. I think, we're at a different starting point, let's say, than we were the last generation, as we talked about the progress that we've seen. And the solutions are there, the needs are articulated, and as you say, countries know exactly where to focus. NDCs have become much more context specific, much more embedded in the other, the broader development priorities and needs. And so it really is about how to take that a step further in terms of really connecting with the resources, whether it's capacity, whether it's financial, whether it's technology, to take forward what has been defined in those NDCs. We have, as part of the kind of UN system effort under the Climate Promise, identified, policy, finance, solutions, and engagement as 4 key areas to dive into and really look at where, in the specific country context, the needs and the levers are really advancing things forward. But it is so country specific. It is so, as you said, the existing instruments that are there, the foundation, the platforms that exist to take this forward is so specific that it really needs to be more of a local based conversation at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so before we close our session, I actually would like to invite Tina back to the stage to actually, according to the plan, it was to provide closing remarks, but I don't know whether you can also give your last thoughts from the chair as well. Please.
Well, thank you. And I think I just want to end by recognizing others who are here from the Marshall Islands delegation. And we have, I'll say first, I think Clarence, who's our director of our climate change directorate, had to step out. But the number 1 person dealing with NDCs is here, Kirsten Madison. So I also want to just thank her for her support leading up to this event. We also have Yoshiko Yamaguchi, is the administrator of our new Resilience and Adaptation Fund. And we have Atina, who's supporting us in the negotiations. And I thank her for wherever she had to step out from. And we have other friends here. Philemon, thank you for coming. But I just want to say it is a, it's I'm here to give the closing, but it's really team effort. And that was what the NDC was, and then any implementation that we do is the same. So the all of society approach is RMI is firmly behind that, and we'll continue to work in that vein. So thank you all for coming.
We look forward to
my
continuing to
colleagues.
support the Marshall Islands. Thank you all for joining us. And again, congratulations to the Marshall Islands for its NDC 3.0. Thank you all.